In the summer heat of 1,872 seconds, Georgia, the town of Calhoun was a place of quiet horror. On the surface, it was a beautiful southern town. Its streets were lined with oak trees covered in Spanish moss. Its fields were green and full of cotton, and its people lived under the warm, harsh sun. But underneath all that beauty and success, there was something much darker. There was an unspoken cruelty that weighed heavily on the town's black people. Caleb was a former slave. He had worked the land of a rich plantation owner before he earned his freedom after the Civil War. But freedom, he quickly learned, was a bitter lie. The chains were no longer made of iron and steel, but of fear, hatred, and cruelty. In the years after the war, the Ku Klux Klan had grown in power and influence. They used terror as their main weapon. They rode at night, burning crosses and destroying the lives of any black person who dared to challenge the way things were. For Caleb and many like him, their new freedom was threatened by the Klan's cruel tactics. The Klan terrorized black communities across the South. They used lynchings, fires, and threats to keep black people in line, to remind them of their place in the world. But for Caleb, the Klan's reign of terror was more than just unfair. It was personal. When the Klan came for his family, when they took away everything he had fought for, Caleb's anger was set on fire. The murder of his brother, lynched in broad daylight, was the spark that set his revenge into motion. This is the story of how Caleb, a man who had once been bound by chains, took brutal revenge on the Klan members who had taken so much from him. In a town where fear was supposed to rule, Caleb stood up to the Klan and made them realize that the black man's spirit could never be broken. It is a tale of resistance, of payback, and of the fierce determination to fight back in a world that tried to crush the soul of every black man and woman. And Caleb's story would echo through the years, a symbol of standing up against the Ku Klux Klan's cruelty. Before we journey through this chapter of history, I want to ask, where are you watching from? What time is it there? And what does it feel like to witness the transformation of a man pushed to the edge? One who stands not in fear but in defiance. Drop a comment below. And if stories of revenge and justice like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear is the kind of payback that history would rather forget. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long slanted rays across the wide farmland that surrounded Caleb's simple home. The tall grass swayed in the wind, and the faint sound of a rooster crowing echoed in the distance. It was a peaceful scene, one that Caleb had fought for with every ounce of his being. He had worked the land as a slave, working hard under the whips of his masters. And when the war ended, he had fought for his freedom. When it was finally given to him, Caleb had built a life that, though simple, was his own. He had a small house on the edge of the town of Calhoun, just beyond the busy white neighborhoods. Here, Caleb had built a quiet life, working as a farmer and a laborer for the other freedmen in the area. He had no big dreams, only the hope of a life where he could raise his family without fear. He had married Ruth, a woman he had known since their days in slavery. Together they had 2 young children, James and Clara. Their lives were simple. Their days were spent working the fields and taking care of the house. But they were happy and free. The peace, however, was fragile. In the early morning hours of one terrible day, the Klan came to Calhoun, riding in under the cover of darkness. Caleb had heard rumors of their return. The whispers in the black community had been getting louder and more frequent, and the Klan's presence had been growing. Their terror was felt in the way black people would flinch when a white man rode through town. The nervous glances exchanged when their eyes fell upon a new set of white faces in town. But Caleb, determined not to live in fear, tried to ignore the tension that hung in the air. He couldn't, though, keep ignoring it forever. It happened one evening when Caleb was returning home from the fields. His hands were still rough from the work, his face glistening with sweat under the setting sun. Ruth had called him inside for dinner. The smell of cornbread and stew filled the small house. The children were playing on the porch, and for a moment Caleb felt the comfort of home, of peace, of safety. But that peace was shattered by a shout from across the street. The Klan had come. The sound of hooves pounding the dirt road echoed in the stillness of the evening. Caleb's blood ran cold as he saw the men on horseback. Their faces were hidden behind white masks. Their long robes flowed in the wind like ghosts of death. They were here for something, Caleb realized. But what could they possibly want with him? His first instinct was to run, to flee and protect his family from the terror that the Klan represented. But then he remembered something. He remembered the way they had come for the other black families, how they had burned homes and destroyed lives. This wasn't just an isolated attack. They were targeting his community. Ruth's voice broke through his thoughts, calling out his name in fear. Caleb turned to find her standing at the door, her hand clasped tightly around Clara and James. Her face was filled with terror. "Caleb, what are they doing here?" she cried. "I don't know, Ruth," Caleb said, his voice serious. "But I'm not going to let them take what's ours. We've worked too hard for this." He moved quickly, gathering his family inside and locking the door. The sound of men laughing, shouting, and chanting outside grew louder as they got closer. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't feel fear. Not yet. It wasn't fear that motivated him now. It was something else, something deeper, something raw and powerful. The Klan began to bang on his door, demanding that he open it. Caleb stood still, his hand resting on the back of a chair, trying to calm his thoughts. Ruth was shaking behind him, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't let them in, Caleb," Ruth whispered, her voice trembling. "Please don't," he didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to the window and peered through the cracks in the shutters. There were 3 men on horseback. Their white robes glowed in the darkening sky. Their faces were covered in hoods. They were here for him, he realized. But why? He hadn't done anything wrong. He had kept his head down, worked hard, and lived as peacefully as he could. "Open the door, boy," one of the men shouted, his voice deep and cruel. "We've come for you." The Klan had come. But Caleb's determination had hardened. He wasn't just fighting for himself now. He was fighting for his family, for his dignity, for everything that had been taken from him. He wasn't about to back down. Not this time. As the door shook under the impact of another strike, Caleb's decision was made. He wasn't going to let them destroy everything he had built. He wasn't going to stand by and let them tear his family apart. The time for fear was over. The next morning, Caleb stood at the window. The first light of dawn was filtering through the trees outside. He had barely slept. His mind was racing with the weight of the decision he had made the night before. The Klan had come to his door, but they hadn't broken him. Not yet. They wanted to scare him, to remind him that no matter how hard he worked or how hard he fought, he was still nothing more than a slave in their eyes, a tool to be used, a body to be controlled. But Caleb was no longer a slave. He had fought for his freedom and earned it, and he would not let it be taken away. The fire that had burned in his chest the night before had only grown stronger, and now as he watched the sun rise over the fields he had worked, he knew what had to be done. It wasn't enough to simply defend himself or his family. That would only push the Klan into more violence. Caleb needed to make them feel the weight of their actions. They had attacked him, but they had also attacked his community. They had tried to create fear, to remind everyone of their power, and Caleb couldn't let that stand. Not anymore. He turned away from the window and walked across the room to the small table where a few of his tools were scattered. His mind was already working, thinking through the plan in his head. He would need to be careful. The Klan was dangerous and they had connections all over the town. If they suspected what he was planning, they would strike before he had a chance to act. He turned to Ruth, who had been silently watching him from the doorway. Her eyes were filled with worry, but also something else, understanding. She knew what he had to do. They had both lived through too much to allow this new terror to control their lives. "You're not going to just run, are you?" she asked quietly, her voice thick with concern. Caleb paused, looking at her. "No, Ruth, we're not running. I'm not running anymore." He stepped toward her, his eyes hard with determination. "They came for us last night, and they'll come again. If I don't act, we'll all be dead or worse. I can't sit here and wait for that to happen." Ruth's face softened, and she stepped closer to him. "I know," she whispered. "But you need to be careful, Caleb. These men, they have power, and we can't fight them if we're not prepared." Caleb nodded. He knew that Ruth was right. He couldn't take on the Klan by himself, but he didn't have to. The black community in Calhoun had lived in fear for far too long, and they were ready to fight back. They just needed someone to lead them. That afternoon, Caleb set about organizing his plan. He met with a small group of trusted men and women from the community, former slaves who, like him, had fought for their freedom. They had seen the Klan's reign of terror, and they had had enough. "I'm not asking for a war," Caleb said to the group, his voice calm but filled with intensity. "I'm asking for justice. The Klan has taken everything from us, our homes, our families, our dignity. But we're not going to let them take it all. We're going to make them feel the same fear they've put in us." The others nodded, their faces filled with determination. They had lived in the shadows for too long, but now they saw Caleb as the spark they needed to start their fight back. "We strike in broad daylight," Caleb continued, looking at each of them. "They think they're untouchable, that they can do whatever they want without consequence. We'll show them otherwise. We'll take the fight to them, but we need to be quick and we need to be smart. This can't be a reckless attack. We need to make sure we hit them where it hurts." The plan was simple but dangerous. Caleb had been watching the movements of the Klan members for weeks. He knew their routines, their patterns. The Klan gathered every week at the town's edge near the old church to plan their next round of terror. It was there that Caleb would strike on their own turf in broad daylight when they least expected it. "We'll hit them hard, take down their leaders," Caleb said, his voice steady. "But we won't kill them, not yet. We need them alive to send a message." Thomas, one of Caleb's closest allies, stepped forward. "What about the town's lawman?" "The sheriff is in their pocket. He'll be here before we even have a chance to move." Caleb's eyes darkened. "We can't trust the law, but we don't need the law on our side. We need to move fast, take them out before they have time to react. And when we do, we make sure the town knows it wasn't just an accident. We make sure everyone knows who's in charge now." There was a murmur of agreement among the group. The plan was dangerous, but it was their only option. If they didn't act now, the Klan would only grow bolder, more violent. The day of the attack arrived with a sense of heaviness in the air. Caleb's group had gathered in the woods, hidden from view. They wore simple clothing, nothing that would give away their intentions. There were no grand speeches, no calls for revenge. There was only the quiet determination that had been building for months. As the Klan members gathered in the distance, Caleb gave the signal. The group moved with precision, slipping through the trees and toward the edge of the town. Caleb's heart raced, but his mind was calm. He had prepared for this moment, and he knew what needed to be done. They struck quickly, overpowering the Klan members before they even had a chance to react. Caleb and his group used the element of surprise to their advantage, taking down the leaders in the first wave. The others, confused and disoriented, were quickly disarmed and tied up. As the last of the Klan members were taken down, Caleb stood tall in the center of the town square. His eyes were fixed on the group of men and women who had fought alongside him. They had done it. They had struck back, not in the shadows, but in broad daylight. They had shown the world that the Klan was not invincible. The midday sun blazed down upon the streets of Calhoun as Caleb and his group moved quickly through the town. The world seemed still, but beneath the calm surface there was a feeling of tension, an electricity in the air, a reminder that the day of reckoning had finally arrived. Caleb's heart pounded not with fear but with a sense of cold determination. This wasn't a moment for hesitation. It was a moment to act, to rise. The Klan had gathered near the old church on the outskirts of town. This was their usual spot for meetings and planning their terror. Caleb had watched them for weeks, memorizing their routine, learning the way they moved. He knew their leaders, men who had spread the violence and fear that had plagued the black community. But today things would be different. Today, Caleb would show them that their reign of terror had come to an end. There were 5 of them. Caleb and 4 trusted allies, all armed and ready for what lay ahead. As they approached the meeting spot, the plan they had created was clear in their minds. Hit hard, strike quickly, and get out before the law could respond. They would not kill, not yet, but the message they were sending would be impossible to ignore. The Klan, who had once thought themselves untouchable, would feel the weight of their own cruelty. Caleb moved first, his eyes locked on the church. The small group followed his lead. He had worked for years under the whip of the system, first as a slave, then as a free man bound by the unspoken laws of an unjust world. But today those chains were broken. Today they would make their own rules. As they neared the church, Caleb signaled for the group to split up. They would surround the Klan members, circle them, and take them down quickly. They didn't have time to waste. The longer they stayed, the more likely the lawmen would find out about their actions. They had to move fast. The Klan members were just beginning to gather. Their hoods were pulled low over their faces. Their voices were filled with laughter as they planned their next acts of terror. Caleb's stomach churned at the sound of their arrogance, their belief in their own power. But that arrogance would be their downfall. In one quick motion, Caleb and his group rushed upon the clan. The attack was precise, an explosion of movement as they surged forward, knocking the unsuspecting men to the ground. Caleb's ally Samuel was the first to overpower a leader, a man named Mr. Harris, known for his role in terrorizing the black community. Samuel's grip was firm around the man's throat, silencing him before he had a chance to scream for help. The other clan members, taken completely by surprise, tried to scramble for their weapons. But Caleb and his group were faster. They moved with an almost scary smoothness, each strike calculated, each movement efficient. The clan members were no match for them, not in this moment. Not when they were no longer fighting from a place of fear, but from a place of justice. As Caleb approached the last of the clan members, a man named Clayton who had been particularly brutal in his attacks on black families, he could see the fear in the man's eyes. It wasn't the same fear that had ruled Caleb's life for so long, but a raw, desperate kind of fear. Caleb was no longer the one who trembled in the shadows. He was the one who controlled the moment. Clayton reached for his weapon, his hand shaking. But Caleb was faster. He grabbed the man by the wrist, twisting it until the gun fell to the ground with a sharp clatter. Clayton's breath came in ragged gasps as Caleb stared him down, his eyes hard with rage and determination. "You've terrorized us for too long," Caleb said, his voice low but filled with a power that Clayton had never seen before. "This ends today." Clayton's eyes darted around, his mind racing for an escape. But there was nowhere to run. Caleb's allies were already securing the others, tying their hands and making them helpless. The clan was no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. Caleb didn't want to kill this man. He didn't need to. He just needed to send a message. He let go of Clayton's wrist, pushing him roughly to the ground. "We're not your property," Caleb said angrily, his words filled with disgust. "You'll never control us again." The clan members were quickly tied up, their weapons taken away, their power stripped from them in a matter of minutes. But Caleb's mission wasn't just about taking them down. It was about something bigger. It was about reclaiming their power, their humanity, and their future. "Take them to the square," Caleb said, his voice carrying authority. "Make sure the town sees them." His group moved quickly, marching the tied-up clan members through the streets of Calhoun. The clan members, still shocked from the sudden attack, struggled in their restraints. But there was no escape. They had been made an example of, their arrogance broken in the face of real power. As they reached the town square, Caleb paused, his eyes scanning the buildings that lined the streets. He could feel the eyes of the townspeople on them, some watching in fear, others in awe. This was the moment Caleb had been waiting for, the moment when the world would see that the clan's reign of terror was over. He turned to his group. "We show them we're not afraid anymore. We show them that they don't get to decide our fate." With that, Caleb stepped forward, his voice rising above the whispers. "This is what happens when you use fear to control people. This is what happens when you think you can break us. But we will not be broken. We will not be silenced. We are free." The clan members, humiliated and tied up before the eyes of the town, knew the game had changed. The power they once held had slipped through their fingers. And now they were nothing more than cowards, exposed and vulnerable in a way they had never been before. The townspeople, once fearful of the clan's reach, now stood in stunned silence, unsure of how to react. But Caleb knew. He knew that this was only the beginning. The message had been sent. The clan had been broken in broad daylight, and their terror would never again rule this land. As the last of the clan members were dragged away, Caleb turned to his group, his heart pounding with adrenaline. But he wasn't done. The fight for freedom, for dignity, was far from over. There were still many battles to be fought, and Caleb would be there leading the charge. The rebellion had come quickly, like a storm tearing through the calm. Caleb had made his stand in the town square, and for the first time in years, the town of Calhoun had witnessed something that it had been too afraid to confront: defiance. In broad daylight, the clan had been exposed for what they truly were, not invincible, but weak, vulnerable, and for once accountable. The message was clear. The people of Calhoun were no longer living in fear, but with every act of resistance there is a price to be paid. And as the sun set on the town that evening, Caleb knew the consequences of his actions were just beginning to unfold. The clan's humiliation had spread throughout the town. But the fear that had kept people silent for so long did not go away so easily. The next day, the streets seemed quieter. the air thicker and the tension more obvious than before. Caleb could feel the weight of his decision pressing on him. The retaliation was coming. It was inevitable. That afternoon, as Caleb walked through the small, crowded market, he saw the first signs of what was to come. A group of white townsmen, their faces hardened and their eyes cold with anger, gathered in the center of the square. They had heard of the rebellion, of the Klan members who had been humiliated, and they were already planning their revenge. Their whispered conversations carried on the breeze, but Caleb could hear the venom in their words. "They're not going to get away with this," one man muttered under his breath, his hand resting on the handle of a rifle slung across his shoulder. Another man sneered. "The Klan will make sure of that. They'll come back for those rebels, and when they do, we'll show them what happens when they step out of line." Caleb's blood ran cold. He knew that the Klan wasn't done. They would regroup and they would retaliate, likely with even greater brutality, and those who had helped him, those who had helped send the message, would pay the price for his defiance. His group had won the first battle, but the war for their freedom was far from over. The next few days passed in a tense silence. Caleb's group of rebels, though encouraged by their success, knew they couldn't stay in Calhoun for long. The town had become a powder keg, ready to explode at any moment. Caleb had always known that his actions would bring consequences, but now the reality of the danger that awaited them began to sink in. That evening, as Caleb met with his closest allies, Samuel, Elijah, and a few others, he could see the worry in their faces. They had been successful, yes, but they were also vulnerable. The Klan had power, and the town's lawmen were either helping them or too afraid to stand against them. The threat of retaliation hung over them all. "We need to move," Caleb said, his voice low but firm. "If we stay here, they'll come for us. We can't let that happen." Samuel, who had become Caleb's most trusted friend, nodded slowly. "I agree, but where will we go? The Klan is everywhere, and they've got allies." "We'll head north," Caleb said, his eyes steady with determination. "There's a network of free black men and women. They can help us. We'll join them and make our stand there." "But the Klan won't just let us walk away," Elijah said, his voice tense with fear. "They'll hunt us down. We're too exposed." "We won't be running," Caleb replied, his voice firm. "We'll be fighting. But we need to stay one step ahead. If we wait too long, they'll have us cornered. We've made our statement, but now we need to act." As the group discussed their plans for escape, Caleb's mind kept returning to one thought. They had fought for freedom, but that freedom had come with a price. The road ahead would be dangerous, filled with uncertainty. But Caleb knew he had no choice but to lead his people forward. They had broken the chains of fear, but those chains were still out there, waiting to trap them again. As the night wore on, Caleb stood on the porch of the small house he had built, staring out into the fields. The winds had begun to pick up, carrying the faint sound of hooves in the distance. The Klan was coming. He could feel it in his bones. Ruth came up beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. She too could sense the looming danger. "They'll come for us, Caleb," she whispered. "We knew this day would come. But what will we do when they get here?" Caleb's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "We fight. We keep fighting, Ruth. They'll have to kill us to stop us, but we won't go quietly." Ruth sighed, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I know, but I'm scared. I'm scared for our children. What if they come for them next?" Caleb turned to her, his face softening. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect you and our family. But we can't let fear control us anymore. We've lived in fear for too long." He took a deep breath and reached for her hand. "We fight for them, for our children, for our future." The words, simple yet powerful, echoed in his mind. They had already fought for their freedom, but now they would have to fight for their lives. The next day, Caleb and his group gathered their belongings. They packed what little they had, preparing for the journey north. There was no turning back. They knew that the Klan would come for them, but they would not wait idly for their doom. They would fight back as they always had. They would make the Klan fear them, make them feel the same terror they had caused for so many years. As they made their way through the town, Caleb's eyes lingered on the faces of the town's people. Some of them looked away, too afraid to meet his gaze. Others watched with a quiet admiration, though they dared not speak. In the distance, the sound of horses' hooves grew louder. Caleb knew the Klan was near. He could hear their voices, their cruel laughter echoing through the streets. It was time to move. Stay close, Caleb murmured to his group. We're leaving tonight. We'll fight, but we'll also survive. They walked toward the edge of town, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of the danger they faced. But they were no longer afraid. They had taken the first step toward their freedom, and they would not let the Klan take it from them. The days following Caleb's strike against the Klan were filled with tension. The town of Calhoun, once a place of quiet but suffocating oppression, was now a battleground. Caleb and his group had done what many thought was impossible. They had struck back in broad daylight and exposed the Klan for what they were. But the retaliation that was sure to follow was already in motion, and it came like a violent storm, sweeping through the town with the brutal force of revengeful fury. It wasn't just the Klan that Caleb had to worry about. The lawmen, too, were no friends to the black community, and many of them had long been helping the Klan. As the days passed, Caleb began to see the full scope of the retaliation taking shape. The Klan had begun to organize, and the lawmen, who had once turned a blind eye to the Klan's activities, were now actively hunting down Caleb and his group. But Caleb had not made it this far to run. He had fought for his freedom, and he would continue to fight for it no matter the cost. That night, Caleb sat in the dimly lit room of the small house where they had been hiding. The door was locked, the windows covered with thick cloth to shield them from prying eyes. His allies, those who had fought beside him, sat silently around him. The weight of the next steps hung in the air. "We can't stay here," Samuel said, his voice low and firm. "The Klan's getting organized. We've already heard rumors that they've got bounty hunters on their way. The lawmen know better. They'll help the Klan if it comes to that." Caleb nodded, his face serious. "I know. We've got to get out of here, move before they can trap us, but where will we go?" Elijah asked, his voice filled with fear. "The Klan is everywhere. We can't outrun them, and we can't go to the law. There's nowhere safe." "There's the North," Caleb said quietly, his mind racing. "There's a network, people who are willing to help, underground railroad stations. The Klan doesn't have power up there. We have to make it to the border, and then we can join them. We can disappear." Samuel's eyes darkened. "The journey's dangerous. And if they catch us, we'll fight," Caleb interrupted, his voice filled with fierce determination. "We fought for our lives once already. We're not stopping now." A heavy silence fell over the group. Each person was thinking about the seriousness of what Caleb had said. The journey north was filled with danger. Bounty hunters, racist sympathizers, lawmen who would arrest them on sight, and the ever-present threat of being caught and returned to the Klan's grasp. But there was no other choice. If they stayed, they would die. And Caleb refused to let them die without a fight. "We leave at first light," Caleb said, his voice determined. "Pack what you can. Don't take anything that might slow us down." The next morning, they began their journey in the early hours before dawn. The town of Calhoun, still covered in darkness, was eerily quiet. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the wind as the group made their way toward the woods that bordered the town. Caleb's heart beat steadily in his chest, but his mind was racing. He had fought for his freedom, and now, as he stepped into the unknown, he felt the weight of what he was about to undertake. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sending a message. The Klan had tried to take everything from him, from his family, from his people. But now Caleb was taking something back. He was taking their freedom, their dignity. As they moved deeper into the woods, Caleb could hear the faint sounds of pursuit in the distance. The sound of horses' hooves, the clink of metal. The Klan, or worse, the law, had already begun their search. Caleb knew they couldn't waste any time. By the time the sun had risen, they had reached the edge of the town where the dense forest offered some cover. But Caleb could feel the danger closing in. He had led his group through the woods many times before. But this time was different. This time the Klan and the law would be hunting them, and they were no longer just farmers trying to survive. They were rebels, fugitives in a world that would do anything to see them silenced. They pressed on, moving quickly but cautiously through the underbrush. Caleb kept his eyes trained on the path ahead, but his mind kept drifting back to the Klan members they had left behind, lying humiliated in the town square. He had made them feel the weight of their own terror, but he knew that it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They were nearing the border, Caleb hoped, closer to freedom, closer to safety. But each step was a risk. Each moment a reminder of the danger that lurked just behind them. The Klan would come for them. The law would come for them, and they would have to be ready. By nightfall, the group had reached a small shack on the outskirts of a nearby town. They had been told by allies that the place was a safe house for those fleeing the Klan's wrath, a brief stop on their journey to the north. Caleb knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. An older black man opened the door cautiously, his eyes scanning the group before settling on Caleb. The man's face was lined with age and hardship, but his eyes held a spark of recognition when he saw the group. "They told me you'd be coming," the man said quietly, "but you have to be careful. The Klan has been tracking folks. They know about you. You've been spotted." Caleb's stomach sank. He had known it wouldn't be easy, but hearing it confirmed made the weight of their situation even clearer. "We're not safe here," he said, his voice tense. "We need to move fast." The man nodded, stepping aside to let them in. "I'll give you food and water," he said, his voice steady despite the seriousness of the situation. "But you'll need to leave again before morning. The Klan's got eyes everywhere." That night, Caleb sat by the fire staring into the flames. The path ahead was uncertain and the Klan's reach was vast. But he was no longer the man who had once cowered in fear. He was the man who had fought back, and he would keep fighting no matter what came next. As the night wore on, Caleb knew one thing for certain. There was no going back. The battle was far from over, and he would lead his people until the very end. The early morning light filtered through the trees as Caleb and his group left the small shack that had served as their temporary refuge. The Klan, though unaware of their exact location, had been on their trail for days, and Caleb knew that the moment of escape had already passed. The chase had begun and there was no going back. They were fugitives now, hunted by the very people who had once ruled the land with terror and bloodshed. But Caleb was no longer the man who had once been frightened by fear. He had already shown the world that the Klan could be defeated, that they were not invincible. His actions, though dangerous and defiant, had made a statement, a message that had rippled across the town of Calhoun and beyond. The Klan would never again control him or anyone he cared about. Now the battle had become about survival. The group traveled through the dense forests of Georgia, moving silently through the underbrush, avoiding main roads where they would be more visible. The path they were on led them to a network of safe houses, hidden places that provided shelter for those on the run. But Caleb knew that these safe houses were becoming fewer and farther between, especially as the Klan grew more organized. The danger was becoming real, and with every step they took, Caleb could feel the threat closing in. As they traveled, Caleb's thoughts kept returning to the message he had sent when he had humiliated the Klan members in the town square. The humiliation had been a victory. But now, as the reality of their situation set in, he understood the true cost. The Klan would not forget the shame of that day. They would strike back with even more brutality than before, and his people, those who had followed him, those who had risen up beside him, would pay the price. But that was the weight of the world they lived in. Freedom was not given, it was seized. And Caleb had already made the choice to seize it no matter the cost. The group reached a larger safe house that evening. A small rundown cabin hidden deep in the woods, far from the prying eyes of the town. As they entered, they were greeted by a group of allies, people who had risked their lives to help those like Caleb escape. The cabin was filled with men and women who, like Caleb, had lived in fear of the Klan and the law, but who now sought refuge in the shadows of this underground network. Caleb's group, tired and hungry, gratefully accepted the food and water offered to them. They had no illusions about their situation. This was only a brief rest, a temporary stop on the long road to safety, and even then they couldn't rest for long. The Klan would come for them, and the authorities would be close behind. That night, as Caleb sat in the dimly lit cabin, he thought about the family he had left behind, the family he had vowed to protect. Ruth and their children were safe for now, but for how long? He couldn't shake the feeling that they would always be in danger, always running. But as long as he breathed, as long as he fought, they would never be without a chance. The next morning, as the group prepared to move on, Caleb was approached by one of the elders from the safe house. The old man's face was lined with age and worry, but his eyes held a kind of quiet wisdom that came from surviving years of oppression. "We've heard word from the north," the elder said, his voice low. "There's a route, a safer path that leads into the mountains. It's more difficult, but it will keep you hidden longer. The Klan has fewer eyes there." Caleb nodded, already knowing what the elder was suggesting. "We'll take it," he said firmly. "We don't have much time." The journey into the mountains was grueling. The weather had shifted, bringing cold winds and rain, and the trails were narrow and dangerous. But they pushed on, their determination unbroken. Caleb's heart, heavy with the weight of his decisions, remained focused on the goal: survival. They had to keep moving, keep fighting. There was no other choice. As they reached the higher ground, the air grew thinner and the shadows grew longer. Caleb could feel the exhaustion in his bones, but he knew they had to keep going. The clan was not far behind, and the longer they stayed in one place, the greater the risk they faced. He had to get them to safety. He had to make sure that the clan would never terrorize his people again. And then, on the horizon, Caleb saw it. The distant outline of a new life, a life where the clan could no longer reach them. It was a place where they could build something new, something that would outlast the hatred that had followed them for so long. Weeks passed, and the group continued their journey through the mountains. Moving in silence, careful to avoid detection, Caleb's group began to grow weary. Some had fallen ill, others were exhausted. But Caleb never wavered. He had led them this far, and he would lead them to safety. Finally, after what felt like forever, they arrived at a small settlement in the northern part of the country. It was a place where many had escaped to, a place where the clan had no reach. It was here, in this quiet corner of the world, that Caleb and his group found their refuge. As Caleb stood in the settlement, looking out at the horizon, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief wash over him. They had made it, but the journey had cost him. The scars from the battle with the clan would never fade. The memories of those he had lost, the friends who had fought beside him and fallen, would always haunt him. But in the end, Caleb knew that he had won something far more precious than safety. He had won his dignity. He had fought back against the terror that had plagued his people for so long. He had shown the clan that they were not invincible, and in doing so, he had begun to rebuild the broken world around him.